Hey everyone, Stitch here. Long story short, at the end of this video, what there's going to be is it's going to be a little short, but it's not made by me. It's made by my friend, SpyFan 2003. He's doing this little series, and in my opinion, I think they're really good, and I want to help promote him. So whenever this video is done, stay after the credits and take a look at his short. They're really well done. He's done a few of them now, and they're really good. So please. Stick at the end of the video because I like you to see what he can do. He can do really great stuff, and please support him because the stuff he does is really good, and I want to see it go far for him. So yeah, that's it. Thank you all for watching the video, and enjoy the show at the end. And Spider-Fan's channel will be in the bottom of the description. So thank you all for watching. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to him for the support you give him. And yeah, so take care, and thank you so much.
Thomas and Friends, making tracks to great destinations.
There are 2, there are 4, there are 6, there are 8, shining trucks and pulling freight, red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew, all with different roles to play around timber sheds are far away. Down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends.
The island of Sodor is surrounded by beautiful blue sea. It has fields of green and sandy yellow beaches. There are rivers, streams, and lots of trees where the birds sing. There are windmills and a coal mine, and docks where visitors to the island arrive. The island also has lots and lots of railway lines. Who's that puffing down the track? It's Thomas! Hello, Thomas! Hello, everybody! Welcome to the island of Sodor. The Great Discovery. Stanley also knew how important Thomas was. He chuffed away thoughtfully. Stanley arrived at the sidings. A train of trucks was waiting for him. But Stanley wasn't thinking about the trucks. He was thinking about Thomas. Stanley thought back to the day when Thomas saw him pulling Annie and Clarabelle. And he remembered the evening at Tidmouth Sheds, when Thomas was upset because Stanley was in his berth. Then Stanley remembered Thomas's face after the accident. Thomas isn't a bad engine. He's a sad engine, Stanley puffed slowly. I wonder if he has run away because he thinks no one likes him anymore. Maybe Thomas is hiding up in the hidden hills. I'll look for him there. I must tell him we all miss him. And Stanley whooshed away to the hills. In the dark tunnel, Thomas was very scared. He was washed and waved forward. His fire had gone out and his boiler was cold. Stanley was high up in the hills. Where are you, Thomas? We miss you, he whistled. But only his echo came back. We miss you. The river was rushing, and Thomas whooshed with it off into the darkness. Suddenly, he crashed through a thick wall of bushes. He flew across a ravine and hit the ground with a bump. Thomas slid down a hill. Trees and rocks were everywhere. Help! Thomas cried. At last, Thomas slithered to a stop at the bottom of the hill. He was stuck. Thomas saw he had landed next to an old track. But how am I going to get onto it? He cried. Thomas could do nothing but wait and hope. Stanley had looked everywhere. He couldn't find Thomas. Soon he would have to go back to work at Great Waterton. Thomas was thinking about Great Waterton. He thought about the tower, and the moment Stanley's truck smashed into it, and the tower tumbled down. I wish I hadn't made Stanley pull all those trucks. I didn't like him doing my jobs, and now look where I am. I'm a very silly engine, he puffed sadly. Thomas wished he was back with his friends. Stanley had to get back to Great Waterton. I'll blow my whistle one last time, Stanley wished, and he whistled loud and long. This time, Thomas heard the whistle. It's Stanley, he gasped. With his very last puff and his very last huff, Thomas blew his whistle as loud as he could. Stanley heard Thomas. Quickly, he reversed back to the branch line. Thomas, he whistled happily. Is that you? Thomas had run out of puff. He couldn't whistle again. He could only wait. Then Thomas saw Stanley chuffing around the bend. Stanley, he cried, I'm very happy to see you. Thomas, whistled Stanley, where have you been? Did you run away? No, tooted Thomas sadly. I was trying to be a really useful engine. Then Thomas told Stanley all about his adventure in the mine. Stanley was amazed. Stanley, tooted Thomas, I'm sorry that I was horrible to you. I was wrong, and I was silly to be cross that you were in charge. I want to be your friend. Stanley smiled. Thomas, he wished, we will be friends, and I'll have you back on that track in no time. Soon, Stanley was hooked up to Thomas. Then Stanley huffed and puffed. Thomas was very heavy. There was a lot of water in his firebox. Stanley didn't give up. I can do it, he wished. And with a mighty heave, Stanley pulled his friend back onto the track. Hooray! Tooted Thomas. Then there was a very loud crack. The valve in Stanley's boiler had burst. Stanley was a very strong engine, but pulling Thomas had been too much. Now he couldn't move. Stanley felt very sad. Don't worry, whistled Thomas. It's my turn to help you. I'll shunt you home. Stanley smiled. Thomas was his new friend. There was nothing Thomas wouldn't do for Stanley. The fireman put Stanley's dry coal into Thomas's firebox. In no time at all, Thomas's boiler was bubbling, and his steam was wheeshing. Here we go, Stanley, Thomas huffed happily. Stanley smiled back. and puff by puff, Thomas shunted Stanley along the track. It was very hard work. Thomas had to puff up hills and huff through bushes, but Thomas didn't mind. He was proud to push his new friend Stanley home. At last, Thomas and Stanley puffed into Great Waterton. Thomas was tired, but he had never felt happier. Henry, Rocky, Edward and Emily were busy working. They tooted and whistled when they saw Thomas and Stanley, and soon the sound of engines' whistles were echoing around Great Waterton. The news spread throughout Sodor. "Thomas is found!" the small engines cried. The thin controller beamed with pride. Terence told Harvey, and Harvey told Trevor, "Thomas is home! He's back forever!" Bill told Ben, and Ben told Molly. They cheered and they whistled, they felt so jolly. All the Diesels met in the sidings. They couldn't believe such wonderful tidings. Percy told Gordon, Toby and James. "My best friend is found," Percy proudly exclaimed. Arthur told Emily along the coast track, "Have you heard the news? Thomas is back." Miss Jenny told Jack, and Jack told his team. Hooray and hurrah, they shouted and screamed. Harold touched down and found Bertie the bus. Bertie hooted and tooted and made such a fuss. Bertie found Lady Hat, who whooped and waved. Lady Hat told her husband, "Sodor is saved." "Thomas is found," cranked Cranky aloud. The cheers and the cheering were a marvellous sound. The fat controller proclaimed very grandly, "Stanley saved Thomas, and Thomas saved Stanley." Next morning, Thomas puffed into Great Waterton. Percy and Stanley were working hard, helping to rebuild the tower. It was almost finished. Thomas smiled. Now he was happy Stanley had come to Sodor. He had so many wonderful friends. How could I ever have wanted to be more important than any of them, he puffed to himself. Now they all worked happily together. Later, the Fat Controller arrived. The tower was finished. It looked magnificent. "Well done to you all," beamed the Fat Controller. "Great Waterton is now ready for Sodor Day." "Please, sir," tooted Thomas, "may Stanley bring the mare to the opening?" "That was your special, Thomas," said the Fat Controller. "Are you sure?" "Oh, yes, sir," Thomas smiled. Surer than sure. Sodor Day arrived. Stanley chuffed proudly in with the mare. Thomas was pleased for his friend. The mare, the Fat Controller and Lady Hat stood by the new tower. "Great Waterton is no longer lost. Welcome to the town of Great Waterton." Then everyone looked up. They could hear the whir of a jet plane. It was Jeremy. He flew high in the sky and over the town of Great Waterton. All the engines whistled and whished. Jack and his team cheered, and everyone clapped. Thomas smiled. He had wanted to be the leader of the track. "But we're all leaders of the track," puffed Thomas proudly. And he couldn't have been happier.
they're 6, they're 8, shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue, they're the really useful crew, all with different roles to play. Around Tidmouth sheds or far away, down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends. Thomas is the cheeky one, James is plain but lots of fun. Percy pulls the mail on time, Gordon thunders down the line. Emily really knows the stuff, Henry toots and Edward puffs. Stanley, he's the new one there, and Toby, he is wise and square. They're 2, they're 4, they're 6, they're 8, shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue, they're the really useful crew, and all with different roles to play. Around Tidmouth sheds or far away, down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends. We go down the hills and round the bends with Thomas and his friends.
It's Thomas. You're the leader. Yeah, come on. Okay, they're 2, they're 4, they're 6, they're 8, shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue, they're the useful crew. That's who, all with different roles to play. Round Tidmouth sheds are far away. Now Stanley's joined this friendly pack. Well, who's this coming down the track?
Oh yeah.
Come on, Thomas is my number 1, shining in the morning sun, working hard but having fun. Thomas, you're the leader. Thomas, you're the leader. Now Thomas has so many friends, the list is long and never ends. James and Percy, they huff and puff, and Emily, well she knows her stuff. Henry, Edward, what a pair, and Toby, like I say, he's square. Gordon thunders down the line, everyone is a friend of mine. That's right. Come on, Thomas is my number 1, shining in the morning sun, working hard but having fun. Thomas, you're the leader, the number 1. Thomas, you're the leader. And let's not forget the narrow gauge, where small and strong is all the rage. To handle rusty, mighty Mac, whoa, fearless Freddy at the back. Renee's and no Peter Sam, Scully, Duncan, he's my man. And with Mr. Percival in charge, no work's too hard, no job's too large. Come on, Thomas, he's my number 1, shining in the morning sun, working hard but having fun. Thomas, you're the leader. Thomas, you're the leader. It's Thomas, Jeremy, and Harold, Rocky, Harvey too, Salty, Mavis, Bertie, the really useful crew. Oh come on, there's not just engines full of steam, there's Jack and all of his building team. Tipping stones and digging roads, filling trucks and loading loads. A top hat who keeps an eye on every engine passing by. Everything is tickety-boo, 'cause out in front is you know who. Yeah, oh, yo, yeah, come on. Thomas is my number 1, shining in the morning sun, working hard but having fun. Thomas, you're the leader. Thomas, You're the leader. Thomas is my number one. Shining number one morning sun. Working hard but having fun. Thomas, you're the leader. You're the leader, Thomas. You're the leader. It's Thomas. It's Thomas. It's Thomas. Thomas the leader. It's Thomas. It's Thomas.